Hello, George Mason University. Welcome back to a special edition of the Pressbox. With us this morning, we have the honor of having Mr. Charley Casserly join us. Mr. Casserly, how are you?
Great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I guess we'll just get started with tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the industry of into the NFL and just your start, how you got your start in the business.
Sure. I was a high school coach in Springfield, Massachusetts, 28 years old. I was making $10,000 a year, but I had a goal of, as crazy as it seemed, to go coach in the NFL someday. So at that point, I wrote every team a letter in the league. There was 28 teams. Shocked me, I got 22 responses. Okay, wow. No jobs, but I got 22 responses. Okay, but I got 2 interviews, one from the Redskins and one with the New England Patriots. And okay. Springfield, Massachusetts is about 75 miles from the Patriots facility. So that seemed like a natural to me. Both offers were the same thing. Internships, come in, work for nothing, put you in different roles, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
The Patriots deal was you'd work 6 months, you'd work the season. At the end of that, they would find you a college coaching job, they said. The Redskins said you work a year for nothing, and at the end of a year, they would hire you, if they liked you, as a scout for $10,000 a year. So at that point in my life, I had $500 in the bank. I had a Chevy Nova with over 100,000 miles on it, and the driver's side door didn't close all the way, so it was kind of a beat-up old car. And it was about 10 years old. The 2 years before that, I lost everything I owned in a fire, so I didn't have renter's insurance. And so at that point, my furniture was Goodwill and Salvation Army. Okay, so my bed was actually now just a mattress on the floor because the bed had collapsed.
Wow.
Okay,
wow.
So but I was offered the internship with the Redskins, so I quit my job. And I'll never forget this. 2 weeks after I quit it, I wrote them in April, interviewed in May, and was going to start July 1st. So in May, when I got offered the internship, about 2 weeks after that, I woke up on a Sunday morning on my mattress on the floor. And I'll never forget this. And I broke out in a cold sweat. And I was scared to death. And I'm thinking, what in the world have I done here? I said, I've quit my job. I don't know if my car will even make it to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
They're not going to pay me for a year. I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Right.
But I couldn't go back. Okay, I had no job now. So I got in my car, came down here, spent a couple weeks in the YMCA in Alexandria, Virginia, and then we went to training camp. And I was the intern in training camp. And back then we played 6 preseason games, so we were there for 2 months. We went in right after July 4th, come out about Labor Day.
Right.
So they paid all my expenses. And as an intern, I did a little bit of everything. I had to answer the camp telephone, so I had to get up I had to be the first one up in the morning, last one to bed at night to run the telephone. I was the Turk, so to speak. I was the guy who cut the players. Back then we had 120 players in camp, so I cut a lot of players.
Wow.
I did some work for the scouts as far as evaluating tapes. I did some work for the coaches as far as breaking down some things on film and writing some stuff up for them. I worked in media relations, public relations. There was only one person there at that time, so they were shorthanded, so I jumped in and helped there.
Okay.
So I did a little bit of everything. I ran errands for the coaches at nights, so it was a great experience. And they put me in scouting for the season, and then college scouting. And after that, I got hired the following year to be a college scout. And probably the turning point to me came because I wanted to coach.
Right.
Is George Allen got fired. And he was the guy who was going to hire me. So a new staff is going to come in, new organization, new general manager. And one of the outgoing coaches said, I know you want to coach, but he says, if a young guy like you would go into personnel and do it with the same zeal that 1,000 guys go into coaching every year, you could go someplace because nobody young goes into scouting. And so I thought, well, that made some sense. So I figured I'd try it for a year. So I did it for a year, and I liked the scouting, so I stayed in it. And at that point in time, when I went into scouting, I may have been the youngest scout in the league at 28, or certainly one of them. Now probably half the league is under 28 in scouting. So
right.
that part's radically changed. And so it was a 1 in a million shot. I was a scout for 5 years, then became assistant GM, and then became general manager in 1989, and then was general manager for 10 years. So I was there for all the Super Bowls, the whole run there, and then I left when the team got sold, and then went to Houston to start that franchise.
Amazing.
So,
That's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story. And in terms of your experience as general manager, how's that experience? Can you take us a little behind the scenes in the daily life of a general manager, the day in, day out operations?
Well, the roles that I had with the Redskins in Houston as a general manager, I was in charge of ultimately acquiring the players, making the final decision in the draft, in charge of the salary cap, okay, the management of the money,
Right.
and represented the team at league meetings along with ownership. Was in communication with the league office in regards to any transactions that went on, any rules or anything like that. Worked with the head coach as far as communicating with the owner. Owner hired the head coach. I was involved in the process, but the owner hired the head coach in both jobs I had, which is typical of that. So that's basically the overview of what you did. You didn't coach the team. You observed the team, reported to the owner on the team, made comments to the coaches about it. The coach, I should say, the head coach. And then what you would do, like from a normal week, to give you a normal week during the season, Monday was basically review the tape with the coaches, any personnel decisions that had to be made. You talked about the evaluation of the game, the grades from the game. If we needed to fill in roster spot, we'd bring players in. We'd organize that on Sunday after the game, but Monday we'd confirm it. Tuesday you'd have tryouts, potentially looking at players to fill roster spots or for the future. And then I would leave Tuesday night, go visit a college Wednesday and Thursday to evaluate the players, preparation for the draft. Come back in on Friday, and Friday would be a number of things. You'd watch practice, you'd visit with the coaches about what happened that week, about the opponent. You'd look at a little tape of the opponent. You'd watch some practice tape, and so Friday would be a full day. Then Saturday I would either go to a game on the way to see us play if we're on the road, or a local game if we were home, or I might just stay in the office and catch up on work after I watched the walkthrough that they have. And of course, Sunday you'd be at the game.
Right.
And you'd observe the game. Most of the time you sat with the owner. If the owner was there, if the owner wasn't there, then you usually sat with the coaches in the press box and observed the game. You'd make your notes. If there was an injury, you'd meet with the trainers right after the game to decide whether we needed a player or not. You talk to the coach about the options at that point, and then you'd be talking to the scouts at the same time. So that's an overview of the season.
Okay.
And then in the off season, you concentrate on your draft preparations, free agency preparations, and that's what you'd be doing right now. In other words, right now you'd be in draft meetings all day long, concentrating perhaps on one position today.
Okay. And to pick up back on the draft, with the draft coming up in a few weeks, what goes into, of course, we see the combine and what goes on in terms of evaluating the players that are coming into the draft. What goes on into that process in terms of evaluating a need or getting skill position players? What goes into the evaluation of who you pick for ultimately to draft for your team?
Well, the first thing is you have two draft boards. You have one by position and then one by round. In other words, here's our first round players in order, here's our second round players in order. And you probably only have 18 to 20 first round grades. And the same thing with the second round. But since your grades are going to be different than other teams, you usually get through your rounds with the players that you have graded in that round.
Okay.
So that's what you're working on right now. You're finalizing both boards. Now, who's involved in the process? Well, you have scouts that go out and scout the players. So, for example, at your major schools, like in Alabama, you'll have an area scout, a cross-check scout from another area come in, your national scout would come in, and I would probably go into Alabama myself during the fall. So you're going to have a minimum of 3 looks, many times 4 looks at your major schools where your better prospects are.
Okay.
You could have as few as 1 look if the school didn't have a lot of prospects, but had somebody we thought was draftable. And if that scout liked the player, then a second person come in. So we have all these multiple reports. Then the coaches, after the season, we give them the higher rated players, say the first 4 rounds of the draft at their position. Then they would evaluate them on tape, might see them in the Senior Bowl, see them work out at the Combine, maybe even go out and work them out so they can get a first-hand look at them. And in February, you put all your scouts in a room and you come up with your ratings by round, by position, and then a list of needs that you have for the players. For example, this player is a corner. We've never seen him in man coverage. Well, let's work him in man-to-man drills. He's a press corner. He plays zone, but he doesn't play man. Okay. We've got a receiver. This guy's hands, we're not sure of, so we're going to drill the heck out of his hands in the spring. This player, we're not sure about his capacity to learn. We're going to work on that in the spring. We have a couple tests we use. Coach is going to put him on the board, put him on the field. We're going to try to put him in our system, see if he can learn our system. So that's a lot of what you do in the month of March. And the coaches now, again, they're getting a first-hand look at some of these players. So now when you come in and put the whole thing together, first of all, 90% of your grade is how they played in the fall.
Okay.
The other 10% is what you're filling in on everything else. Okay. What's their 40 time? How big are they? How do they do in the drills when they work out? Is there a medical concern with them? Character concerns, intelligence. We have a mental test that we used had no reading or writing in it. So if a person had a reading problem or an educational deficiency in the background, they could do this test.
Okay.
Okay, because you have to have a test to handle everybody.
Okay.
And that was our reasoning there. So you have all this information, and then you put it together as you're going through your meetings with each player, and you arrive at a final grade. Many times what you'll do is you'll look for history to guide you. In other words, how does this player compare to other players taken? And that usually gets you into a round on a historical comparison, and that becomes pretty accurate, and it becomes a pretty good measuring stick to avoid forcing players up because you need a certain position. You don't do it consciously, you do it subconsciously. You talk yourself into it sometimes, okay?
Okay.
And that's where you make your most mistakes. The key in drafting is to come up with your board, best player, ranked by best player, and just stay with that board, okay? And then if you want to fill a need, trade up or trade down to fill the need during the draft. So that's what goes into the draft process. In the draft, it's a very calm situation. All your discussions get done before the draft. During the draft, your major discussion is, do we trade up? Do we trade back? Or if we got two players rated together, yes, we'll have one ahead of the other, but do we think one might be there in the next round? And therefore we go with the one we got to get now and gamble on the one in the next round. So those are the discussions that actually happen during the draft.
Okay. And I know there's always time where there's college athletes where they're studs in college and may not transition to the pros, and vice versa. Maybe guys that may get overlooked, and when they come to the pros, they may excel, may shine. Is there any reason to why that might happen at times? Why some guys may be undervalued or overvalued in a sense?
I think there can be a lot of things. First of all, the process is flawed. It's people evaluating people. So both sides are human and both sides are not perfect, okay? So you have that element going into this all the way. So it's an educated guess whenever you're doing this.
Okay.
Of all the players in a year drafted, only 30% ever become starters after 4 years. So that's 70% don't. And that 30%, not all of them start for the team that drafted them. So that's not a high percentage of success when you look at it league-wide. I think there's a number of factors. One, you're projecting a guy from one level to the next. So, and that includes on the field and off the field. So how does he handle the pressure? How does he handle success? How does he handle money? How does he handle distractions? Okay, that's part of it. Maybe you're wrong too. You forced the pick up higher than it should have been because you need the position. So you put him in a position where he got drafted too high and didn't have a realistic chance to meet the expectations of what that round is. So those are some of the things there. And many times it gets back to overrating the player, okay, as to what you thought, how good he really was.
Right. Okay. And real briefly, you want to just tell us about the class that you teach here at George Mason University?
Right. It's sport. I teach two in sport management. One is an undergraduate class. It's $475, and I call it how do you get a job? How do you keep a job? I started as an intern. And once I became assistant GM of the Redskins, I restarted the intern program and had a number of successful interns that are still in professional sports or associated with professional sports today, over 30 of them. And I took kind of the philosophy behind what we did in developing interns and put it into a class.
Okay.
We do the logistics about, how do you interview, resume, how do you write a resume, how do you do a cover letter. And then we talk a lot about the attitude that you have to display to be successful in the workplace. Then we bring in a number of guest speakers. We bring in people from local sports teams, talk about their hiring process. We bring Dr. Baker in to talk about looking for a job on the internet. Fellow students come in and talk about their internship experiences. I bring in somebody to talk about social media, the do's and the don'ts. I bring a professional speech coach in and a writing expert to talk about communication skills for them. So those are some of the people that we bring in from the outside in. So So it's how do you get a job, how do you keep a job is the philosophy of the class. Then the summer class I teach, it's in the master's programs for young teachers and coaches.
Okay.
We cover, it's a 2-week class, the last 2 weeks of June. It's 4 hours a day for 10 days. So it's pretty intense, but I think it's a great class for young teachers and coaches. We talk about leadership, developing leaders, motivation, developing teamwork, media relations, crisis management. That's week 1. So we get a lot done in a week.
Okay.
We take a class on each one of those. The second week, we talk about your first 100 days on the job. How do you deal with winning and losing, success and failure? We talk about how to interview for a job, how to hire somebody, how to evaluate people. Okay, so that's week 2.
Okay.
And we usually try to have a speaker or 2 come in during that class. So those are our 2 classes, and hey, we love it here. We've been here since 2008, and it's a great university, and it's been a lot of fun for me.
Thank you, Mr. Casserly,
Okay.
so much for joining us. As a
Great to be
pleasure.
with you now.
Thank you, and come back again soon.
We will.
Thank you. Thank you, George Mason University, for joining Inside the Press Box. I'm Vandy Bernard with our special guest, Mr. Charley Casserly. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.